On an ordinary summer afternoon, two young sisters, Emma and Sophie, decided to venture into the woods behind their house. They had always been adventurous, curious about the secrets hidden between the trees and the moss. The forest was vast and mysterious, but to them, it was a place of innocence and play. They had wandered through it countless times before, running after one another, hiding in bushes, and listening to the birds singing. But that afternoon felt different. The woods no longer felt like a place of adventure, but instead a place filled with secrets they couldn't understand. They hadn't realized that the afternoon was slipping into evening, and the light was slowly fading. The sun filtered through the trees, but now the light seemed strange, sharp, and eerie. The silence that enveloped the forest was heavy, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. As the girls wandered deeper into the woods, the air grew colder, and it felt as though the forest was slowly swallowing them up, wrapping them in an unknown, invisible force. Meanwhile, their father stood outside. It was time for the girls to come in. "Emma, Sophie, come inside. It's time for dinner," he called from the yard. The girls looked back for a moment, smiled at each other, and then started running in his direction. But when he stepped into the forest to call them in, his heart stopped. There, amidst the shadows of the trees, stood his daughters. They weren't playing, laughing, or running around like they usually did. No, this time they stood there, their faces blank, their eyes distant, as if they were lost in a trance. Their hands were tightly entwined, but there was no smile, no sign of joy. It was as if they were being led by something beyond their control. And there, between them, stood a figure. It was massive, much taller than a normal person, with limbs that were unnaturally long, white as bone, like the branches of a dead tree. Its face was just a blank, smooth surface, like a shadow that had taken form. The figure stood still, unmoving, while it led the girls deeper into the woods. Hand in hand, they walked, slowly, like puppets, shadows trailing behind them. The father couldn't move. His breath caught in his throat. "Emma, Sophie," he shouted, his voice hoarse with panic. But the girls didn't react. They simply continued, eyes fixed on the figure in front of them, their hands firmly held by Slender Man. He began to run, desperate, his heart pounding in his chest. "Come back," he screamed, but his legs gave out beneath him. The girls and the figure moved faster than he could ever hope to. It was as if they weren't walking anymore, but being drawn forward, deeper into the woods by something far more powerful than him. The shadows seemed to embrace them, pushing them further away from him. No matter how hard he ran, no matter how fast he called out, the figure was always just a step ahead. The distance between them grew, the girls moving farther and farther, until their figures were swallowed up by the darkness of the trees. The father stopped, breathless, heartbroken, his eyes frantically scanning the woods. It was too late. The girls were gone, as if the forest itself had swallowed them whole. The silence that followed was unbearable. He stood there, calling out, listening for any sign of them, but there was nothing. It was as if they had never existed, as if the forest had consumed them. He rushed back to the house, dialed the police, but the search yielded no answers. No footprints, no clues. It was as if the girls had vanished from the earth. The days passed, and the girls never returned. The house was silent. The father stood outside every evening, staring into the woods, hoping for a sign. But the only thing he ever heard was the wind whispering through the trees. Rumors spread throughout the village. People whispered about the old forest, about the shadow that walked in the night, about children who had disappeared, taken by the darkness. But the forest held its secrets, and the girls would never return. They were trapped, lost in the shadows, walking hand in hand with something that was not of this world. And every night, when the moon was high in the sky, someone, maybe a lost traveler or a curious child, would hear the soft sound of footsteps moving further into the forest, slowly fading into the eternal darkness. Two girls, hand in hand, led by a figure that had no face. And no one ever dared to enter the woods again.